My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life I thought I understood what family meant. I grew up in a small but respectable town, in a house where appearances were more important than honesty. My father was quiet, hardworking, and carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. My brother, Thomas, was the golden child praised for every little achievement, showered with affection, the pride of my mother's eyes. And then there was me, the second son, always standing in his shadow, always fighting for scraps of recognition. I used to tell myself that maybe my mother was just strict, that her silence when I brought home good grades or when I worked long hours meant she expected more of me. But as the years went by, it became impossible to deny. She didn't just hold me to higher standards, she treated me as though I wasn't part of her at all. When relatives visited, she would parade Thomas around like a trophy, while I was either hidden or dismissed. The message was clear. In her eyes, I didn't belong. Still, I stayed quiet. I studied, I worked, I built a life. I thought that by succeeding on my own terms, maybe one day I would finally hear her say, "I'm proud of you." That day never came. Instead, I heard something else, words that cut me deeper than any silence ever could. And it happened at our family table, on the night everything changed. It was my father's 65th birthday, a milestone. Our relatives filled the dining room, glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the walls. The long oak table was covered with dishes my mother had spent all day preparing. Thomas sat beside her, smiling, basking in the glow of admiration as he recounted his latest business triumphs. I sat quietly on the other side of the table, sipping my wine, observing. At one point, my aunt turned to my mother and said, "You must be so proud of both your sons." My mother smiled thinly, placed her hand on Thomas's, and replied, "Of course, Thomas has always carried the family name with pride. He's the one who keeps us together." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My aunt glanced at me awkwardly, as though she'd just witnessed something indecent. But my mother wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, her voice calm yet cutting, and said, "Daniel has always been different. Sometimes I wonder if he's really one of us. He feels like a stranger in this family." The room fell silent. Forks froze mid-air. My father looked at her in shock. Thomas stared down at his plate, and I sat there, my heart pounding, my blood turning cold. For a long moment, I said nothing. The chatter slowly resumed, as though people were trying to brush past the awkwardness, but the damage was done. Those words lodged in my chest like shards of glass. I replayed them again and again. A stranger in this family. I excused myself from the table, walked into the hallway, and stared at the old family portraits lining the wall. Thomas's graduation, my parents' anniversary, countless birthdays. I was in those pictures, yes, but always off to the side, always an afterthought. Suddenly, I realized the truth. I wasn't just ignored. I was being erased. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I had spent my life waiting for their approval, chasing scraps of affection that never came. But now, I didn't want their love, I wanted something else. I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted every single person who had ever dismissed me to see what my mother really was. That night, as the party ended and relatives left, I began my plan. It would take patience. It would take silence. But one day, at another family table, I would speak one truth that would destroy the illusion my mother had spent her whole life building. And when I did, she would finally understand what it meant to be the stranger. That night, as I lay in bed, my mother's words echoed in my ears, "A stranger in the family." Those words weren't just an insult. They were the summary of my entire life. For the first time, she had spoken aloud the rejection I had felt since childhood. Inside me, there was both rage and an odd sense of clarity. Now I knew beyond doubt, she never wanted me, and worse, she was ashamed of me. But in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, a thought formed. Maybe this was my chance. If she declared me a stranger, Then I would show her who she really was. The secrets she had buried for years needed to come out, and I was the one who would expose them. The next day, I came home early. The living room was empty, but the photo albums on the table caught my eye. My mother had always taken pride in showing these albums to guests. I flipped through the pages. Thomas's birthday cakes, his school awards, family vacations. And me? I was there, yes, but never at the center. Always blurred, always in the background. It hit me. This wasn't forgetfulness, it was deliberate. My mother had been erasing me for years. Those photo albums weren't memories. They were evidence of her silent war against me. I whispered to myself, "I'll use this evidence to tear off your mask." Weeks passed. On the surface, life looked normal. My father went to work. My mother carried on with her routine. Thomas continued to shine in his career. But each day, I gathered small fragments. Old letters, bank documents, even notes I found hidden in drawers. My mother never showed anyone. I kept them all. Every piece was proof of her hypocrisy. Sometimes at night, I stared at my reflection and asked myself, do I really want revenge, or do I just want to be seen? But the answer was always the same, both. Because for me, the only way to become visible was to destroy my mother in front of everyone. One evening, I found myself alone with my father. We sat at the table drinking tea, the television on but neither of us listening. I looked at him quietly and asked, "Dad, did you never notice? How Mom treated me, how she ignored me for years?" He stared into his glass. His lips trembled. "You think I didn't notice, don't you? I saw it, Daniel." But I stayed silent. Because if I spoke up, the balance in this house would have shattered, and the gap between you and your mother would have only grown wider. That's when I realized my father was her accomplice. His silence had been my mother's greatest weapon. My heart broke, but I also felt something else. His fear would become my strength, because I would no longer remain silent. My conversations with Thomas grew more tense. One evening, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't push Mom too far. If you hurt her, you'll have to face me." But in his eyes, I didn't see anger. I saw fear. He couldn't let go of our mother. The idea of losing her affection terrified him. That's when I understood. Thomas wasn't strong. He was her puppet. His pride, his confidence, all of it depended on her approval. I almost laughed. Because while I was breaking free, he was still chained to her. And I was the one who would break those chains. I was slowly building my plan. First, I needed evidence. I found the drawer where my mother kept her hidden documents, bank statements, letters, even old correspondence about my grandfather's inheritance, all carefully tucked away. In one document, I discovered a truth my father had never been told. My mother had concealed a large part of my grandfather's inheritance, and she had shared this secret only with Thomas. My father knew nothing. At that moment, I made my decision. If my mother excluded me from the family, then I would tear the family apart with the truth. I would use her own weapon against her, secrets. I remained silent until the next family gathering. Everyone thought I had been ignored into submission. But every day, I sharpened my plan, organized my evidence. Finally, the day arrived. The long table was set again, relatives gathered around. My mother sat at the head, Thomas by her side, my father quiet in the corner. I walked him carrying a small folder. No one knew it yet, but that night, the empire my mother had built over decades would collapse. And I would no longer be the stranger, I would be the keeper of the truth. That evening, the table was lively with chatter. Everyone laughed while I remained silent. My mother's glance at me was still filled with disdain, as if I had no right to sit there. The anger inside me grew with every passing second. That evening, the table was lively with chatter. Everyone laughed while I remained silent. My mother's glance at me was still filled with disdain, as if I had no right to sit there. The anger inside me grew with every passing second. Suddenly, I stood up. The screech of my chair silenced the entire room. I placed the folder onto the table. "Since I'm the stranger in this family," I said coldly, "let me show you what the stranger has seen." All eyes turned to me. My mother narrowed her eyes. Thomas's face tightened, and my father lowered his head. Everyone sensed that this family dinner was about to become a battlefield. I opened the folder. Inside were old documents, bank statements, and yellowed letters. One by one, I laid them on the table. "These are about grandfather's inheritance," I explained. "And according to these, my mother has been hiding things for years." Faces around the table froze in shock. My mother quickly tried to snatch the papers, but I stopped her hand. Even as the stranger, I noticed every detail. Because while you all refused to look at me, I was watching all of you. Thomas leapt to his feet. "Enough, this is nonsense," he shouted. But the panic in his voice spoke louder than his words. Because he knew the secret too. I turned to him. "You've stood by her side for years. You turned your back on me because you feared losing her affection. But now everyone sees you were her accomplice." Thomas's lips trembled. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Whispers rippled across the table. My father still remained silent, his face pale as chalk. I turned to him. "Did you know too, Dad? Or have you just stayed quiet all these years?" He took a deep breath, but said nothing. His silence was the loudest confession. Everyone at the table understood he had known. And in that moment, I realized my mother's greatest shield had always been his silence. My mother glared at me with fury. "How did you find this? Did you search my drawers?" she snapped. But everyone already knew. The truth was out. The room held its breath. I stood, leaning over the table. "You called me a stranger, but the real stranger is you. Because it was your lies that destroyed this family." The room held its breath. I stood, leaning over the table. "You called me a stranger, but the real stranger is you. Because it was your lies that destroyed this family." For the first time, my mother's face lost its mask. The strong, cold woman was gone. In her place sat someone desperate and afraid. But I wasn't finished. This was only the beginning. The papers on the table were just the first blow that would unravel her life. That night, the air around the table had become suffocating. The clatter of cutlery had long ceased. Food on the plates had gone cold. Nobody moved. Every eye was fixed on me and the documents laid out before me. My mother sat rigidly, her lips pressed together, veins standing out on her face. The woman who had always commanded control was for the first time cornered and powerless. As I watched her, I felt both satisfaction and a strange ache. I had never seen this side of her before. She was always strong, always looking down on me, always judging. But now her eyes trembled with panic, her breath came uneven. How did you bring this here?" she asked, her voice trembling. It carried none of the cold authority I'd grown up with. "Because I never forgot, Mother," I said. "When you ignored me, I was watching you. When you called me a stranger, I was learning who my family truly was. The things you hid were visible to me because when you refused to look at me, I saw everything." Relatives began whispering among themselves. My cousin turned to my father in shock. "Is this true?" My father lowered his eyes, covering his face with his hands. And I realized then his silence was no longer protecting her. It was dragging her deeper into ruin. And this was only the beginning. Because inside that folder, there were things I hadn't yet revealed. And I was ready to bring them all out that night. Thomas, though he had been my brother all my life, had never felt more like a stranger to me than in that moment. His face was flushed red, a vein pulsing on his forehead. Suddenly, he shoved his chair back and stood up. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted. "Nonsense?" I turned to him. "What about these documents? Is it nonsense that grandfather's inheritance was hidden from Dad? Is it nonsense that you've been silent all these years, letting Mom's lies grow stronger? For a moment, his eyes went vacant. His expression betrayed everything he knew, and his silence had only made my mother's deceit stronger. I was just trying to protect her," he finally muttered, his voice trembling. "Dad could never handle the truth. You don't know how fragile he is." A bitter laugh escaped me. Yes, Dad was fragile. But Mom's lies didn't protect him, they only deceived him. And you, Thomas, you weren't my brother, you were her extension. Her accomplice. The room fell into an icy silence. Thomas's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw not just fear in his eyes, but shame. My father had stayed silent until that moment, but now something could no longer be contained. He rubbed his face with his hands, then lifted his head. In his eyes there was anger, pain, and exhaustion all at once. "Is it true, Mary?" he asked, turning to my mother. His voice carried the weight of a broken man. "Did you hide what grandfather left? Did you make Thomas your accomplice? Did you lie to me for years?" For the first time, my mother averted her eyes. Her lips trembled. I was trying to protect you. If you knew, everything would have fallen apart. The family would have fallen apart." A bitter smile formed on my father's face. "The family has already fallen apart, Mary. You ended it years ago." The expressions on our relatives' faces shifted. Shock gave way to a grim acceptance. It was as though everyone had known this truth deep down, but had never heard it spoken aloud until now. And I thought about the word stranger my mother had thrown at me. The irony was clear. I wasn't the stranger here. They were strangers to one another. The silence around the table felt less like a birthday celebration and more like a courtroom. Everyone was holding their breath. All eyes were fixed on my mother. For the first time, behind her strong mask, there was a trembling, desperate woman. She bit her lip, clutching the edge of the table. "Yes," she finally said, her voice just above a whisper. "Yes, I hid it. Because if you, John," she turned to my father, "if you had known everything, you couldn't have kept this family together. You were weak. I had to make the decisions for you." A murmur spread across the room. Relatives whispered among themselves. My cousin shook his head. My aunt wiped away tears. A few bowed their heads in shame. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my mother. "No," I said. "You didn't keep this family together, you poisoned it with your lies. And that poison consumed all of us. But most of all, it consumed me. Because while you tried to erase me, I saw the truth more clearly than anyone else ever could." My mother lifted her head, her eyes caught between fury and helplessness, but she couldn't find the courage to speak. Because the documents on the table spoke louder than anything she could say. Thomas still stood with his fists clenched, but the anger in his eyes no longer looked convincing. It had been replaced with desperation. He turned to me. "Why are you doing this, Daniel? What will you gain? By humiliating our mother in front of everyone, what do you really achieve?" I rose to my feet and stepped closer to him. "What will I gain?" I repeated. "I will take my life back. For years you treated me like a stranger. Our mother lived as if she never gave birth to me. You weren't a brother, you were her extension. And Dad stayed silent because silence was easier for him. But I will never stay silent again." Some relatives nodded subtly, their eyes showing support. Others still looked doubtful. But I knew one thing for certain. For the first time, everyone at that table was questioning my mother's story. Her perfect family image had cracked, and I was about to turn that crack into a canyon. My father took a heavy, deep breath. He pulled his hands off the table and set them on his knees. Tears welled in his eyes, but his anger was stronger. "Mary," he said, turning to my mother, "you lied to me for years. You turned Thomas into a weapon. And Daniel, you made him not a son, but a scapegoat." My mother trembled. "I only wanted to protect you, to protect the family," she whispered. My father slammed the table. The plates rattled. "No, you didn't protect us. You tore us apart from one another. And most of all, you tore us away from Daniel. I lost him because you cast a shadow over him. In that moment, I felt something strange inside me. For years, my father's silence had felt like betrayal. But now, for the first time, I saw the fire that had burned inside him too. And that fire wasn't only for my mother, it was for himself, for the weakness that had let this all happen. Voices rose among the relatives. Some tried to defend my mother. She only wanted the best. Others turned to me. This truth needed to be told. The room no longer felt like a celebration. It was divided, a battlefield split in two. I stood and delivered my final words of the moment. You called me a stranger. But there's only one stranger at this table, the one who betrayed her own family. Tonight, everyone has learned that the things you've hidden under the name of family were nothing more than a rotten inheritance. My mother sank into her chair. For the first time in years, I saw her face truly defeated. Her collapse was my rise. But I wasn't done yet. Because the most shocking truth, I was still keeping it hidden. The room was now completely consumed by tension. On one side, my mother sat collapsed. On the other, my father trembled with rage, while Thomas sat in silent desperation. The relatives were divided. Some bowed their heads, some whispered, and some couldn't tear their eyes away from me. In my hand, there was still one envelope unopened. My greatest card, the one I had hidden for weeks. Slowly, I placed it on the table. The metal clasp cracked. All eyes locked on it. My mother called me a stranger, I said, my voice steady. But I am not the stranger here. The true stranger is the one who has always appeared to belong the most. Thomas's face went pale. His lips parted, but no words came. Inside, I almost smiled, because he knew. He knew that what I was about to reveal would not only destroy my mother, but him as well. I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies, correspondences, and signed documents. My voice was clear. These are secret agreements between my mother and Thomas. A portion of grandfather's inheritance legally belonged to me. But the two of them manipulated signatures and transferred the assets to themselves. The room erupted in gasps. Some relatives shot to their feet. My aunt cried out, "How could you do this?" Thomas turned to me in fury. "You don't understand anything." He shouted, "I did this for Mom. She needed to stay strong. You've always been a burden to this family." I remained calm, fixing my eyes on him. "No, Thomas. I was never the burden. The burden was your blind loyalty to her. In protecting her, you betrayed both me and Dad." My father sank back into his chair, running his hands through his hair, his eyes brimming with tears. "So, all these years, everything was a lie," he muttered. My mother began to cry, but her tears weren't of remorse, they were of panic at being caught. Thomas slammed his fist on the table, trying to tear the documents apart. I pulled the folder back, protecting it. "These papers won't stay here," I said. "Tomorrow they'll be in court. You called me a stranger, Mother. But the truth is, you were the strangers. To each other and to me." At that moment, everyone at the table realized the secrets that had been buried for years had finally come out, and there was no going back. Amid the chaos in the room, I stood tall. All the relatives' eyes were now on me. Some looked at me with pity, some with admiration, some still in shock. But one thing was certain, everyone had learned the truth. My mother sat frozen in her chair, her eyes staring into nothing. Thomas trembled in the corner. My father wept silently. And I had changed the meaning of the word stranger that had been branded onto me for years. I was no longer the stranger. I took a deep breath and looked around the table. Tonight, while a family falls apart, I found my identity. And that identity is stronger than the lies you buried for years. But inside me, there was still one secret left. I hadn't spoken it yet. And that secret would be the final blow, not just to my mother's place in this family, but to her entire life. As the murmurs at the table continued, I pulled out the final envelope hidden beneath my folder. It was different from the other documents, no bank seals, no family correspondence. This came from another source. When I placed it on the table, my mother's eyes widened. A quiet "no" slipped from her lips. "Everything you've learned tonight has changed the story," I said, "but I still haven't revealed the greatest truth." The room went silent, breaths held. I opened the envelope and pulled out a few items: an old letter, hospital records, and a photograph. The photo was from years ago, my mother, smiling, standing next to a man no one recognized. "Who is this?" I asked. My mother couldn't answer. So I continued, "This man is my real father." The room froze completely. Plates clattered to the floor. My aunt screamed. My father stiffened, his breath caught in his throat. The blood drained from my mother's face. My mother finally managed to speak, her voice hoarse and trembling. It was a mistake, a weakness in my youth. It meant nothing." My father shot to his feet in fury. "A mistake?" he roared. "You built decades of lies on this mistake. You raised Daniel as my son, but you never told me the truth." I stepped in, my tone calm but cutting. "No, Dad, I was never your son. But I am not just the victim of her lies either. I was never the stranger in this family. What made me a stranger was the truth she buried all these years." The relatives around us were breathless. Some cried, others shook their heads. But in every mind, the same realization echoed. This family had been destroyed by my mother's betrayal long ago. It was only now being exposed. Thomas had collapsed to the floor, covering his face with his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. He seemed as though he was only now realizing the truth. He turned to my mother. You didn't even tell me. I did everything for you, but you never told me the truth." My mother reached out to touch him, but Thomas pulled away. The blind loyalty in his eyes was shattered, replaced by hatred. My father quietly walked toward the door. He wanted to leave, unable to accept that everything he had believed for decades was a lie. His silent footsteps echoed louder than my mother's cries. I stood tall at the head of the table. "And this is why, Mother," I said. "When you tried to cast me out of this family, you were digging your own grave. Because I was the only one who held your greatest secret. And now everyone knows." The silence at the table felt like the ruins after a storm. My mother sat trembling in her chair, drowning in her tears. Thomas was broken in the corner, and my father had already walked out. Relatives slowly rose from their seats, leaving the room but never taking their eyes off me. I took a deep breath. Inside me was a strange peace. For years they had called me a stranger. But that night, at the head of the table, I was the only true host. Because I was the one who spoke the truth. My mother looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with both hatred and desperation. But I no longer cared. Because revenge was not sweet, it was freedom. And that night, for the first time in my life, I was free. If you like this video, please comment and subscribe.